Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and today we're going to be discussing the Call of Cthulhu scenario, Mister Corbitt. Written by Michael DeWolf, the scenario is part of the Mansions of Madness collection, originally published in 1990. The adventure is short, coming in at just 13 pages, and it's designed for a small group, including down to just a single player. I love that aspect about it. I really wish there were more adventures that were designed for solo play, as in one player and one game master, because to me, one-on-one games are much more Lovecraftian in essence than they are if they're going to be a big group. Now, while the adventure doesn't give a maximum number of players, I'd recommend capping it at 3, with 2 probably being the most ideal for it. Now, I ran this adventure as a solo with a single player. We had a lot of fun, and the session took us about 3 hours to complete from start to finish. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer my criticisms and my suggestions as a game master who has successfully run this adventure.
Hey, and I'm Jack the NPC. I'm going to give this one to you from a player's side of things, as well as my normal peanut gallery sort of comments.
Wait a second. Jack, you have 2 eyes.
Yeah, what about it?
Yeah, but you lost an eye in the last video.
Oh, this? Oh, yeah, that totally sucked. But now, I went ahead and got a new one. Actually, I got 2 new ones, so you know what? I got a spare for the next time we do something like that. And the best part is it only cost me a soul.
You sold your soul for an eye.
Oh, not my soul, just a soul. Best not to ask about that. Also, I'm seeing ghosts now, which is kind of weird, but I think that's just my body adjusting to the new eyeball.
Now, one criticism that I do want to mention before the spoiler warning is that the scenario's name causes a lot of confusion. Mr. Corbitt, the focus of this scenario, is the same name as the main character from The Haunting, where the investigators explore the Corbitt house. These 2 characters are not related. Both adventures follow a house. That one should be self-evident because it's in a collection that's titled Mansions of Madness. However, the name Corbitt House gets thrown around a lot as a scenario that gets recommended. Problem is, there's no scenario out there that I'm aware of that's called the Corbitt House. There is a Corbitt House, though, and 2 completely separate Call of Cthulhu adventures. The problem with that is it causes a lot of needless confusion because there was no real point for them to have the same name.
So yeah, out of all the thousands of possible names that they could have possibly given this character, they just decided to go with the name of the character from the most popular Call of Cthulhu scenario of all time. Freaking brilliant!
Now, before we do go any further, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. So for any players in the audience, if you have any plans of ever playing this scenario, please stop now. But send your game master this way to see if Mr. Corbitt might be a right fit for you and your group, and they can get the inside scoop on how I suggest tweaking it for maximum fun. But if you keep watching this video, it will ruin the surprise. Alrighty, Game Masters, let's dive in. The setup is that the player character's neighbor, the widely respected Mister Corbitt, is in truth a follower of Yog-Sothoth and is creating a horrible monster in his basement. This is a wonderfully fun scenario, but it requires a very specific path of what the characters have and what they are going to do once the scenario begins. The first thing that the players need is a house. Not just any house, but a house that is in a neighborhood that's affluent enough that it's going to have mansions in it, specifically Mr. Corbitt's mansion. Now, the easiest way, of course, is if the player character owns a house in a nice neighborhood, but you could also have him be just renting the house, or it could be the house of a family member that they're staying with, kind of like an ailing, sick relative that they're taking care of. But the important part is the player character has lived here for some time and has been able to get to know who all their neighbors are and everything like that, and they know who Mr. Corbitt is and a little bit about him. Now, the scenario itself opens on a Sunday. Mention that it's a Sunday, but don't make any big deal about that. Don't tip the players off that you're basically giving them a clue with the first word of the scenario. Just mention it's a nice, lazy Sunday. The character should notice Mr. Corbitt out through the window as he's parking his car in front of his house.
Hey, it's my friendly neighbor, Mister Corbitt. He's getting something out of his car. Oh, he dropped it. What is that? Oh my God!
Mr. Corbitt drops a bundle as he's opening up his front door, and the players should make a spot hidden roll, and if they succeed, they're going to see a child's arm fall out of this bundle. Now, since this is the inciting incident that causes the entire adventure to happen because of it, I don't say that you leave this up to chance, because if you require that they have to make a spot hidden roll, they are going to inevitably fail their spot hidden rolls, and then where are you? So I would just give this to them. Maybe have them, roll a spot hidden roll, and whoever gets the closest to it gets to see it, or have them roll a luck, or you could just choose arbitrarily. But I go ahead and say that you let the PCs see the severed arm, otherwise it might be a little bit more difficult for you to get this game going. Now, the module assumes, though, that this incident is going to be enough to spur the adventure onward. The problem is that players and player characters might not and probably won't do it the way that the module intends, and it's not going to go the way that you want them to because, players have their own ideas of what to do. For example, my own player, when I ran this game, first thing he did was he called the police and then just watched from the window as the police arrived to arrest this guy.
Yeah, have fun in jail, psycho.
After a half-assed inspection of his home, the police emerged again from the house, laughing and chatting with the owner, Mister Corbitt, each of them carrying a small basket of fresh fruits and vegetables from his garden.
Son of a bitch! What does it take to get a rich, affluent white guy arrested around here?
What I recommend is that you establish before the start of this adventure that Mr. Corbitt is a well-respected member of the community. Have him be friends with the mayor and the police chief and all the affluential people of whatever town it is that you're going to have this adventure. Have him be a model citizen, somebody that regularly knocks on their door and shows up, trying to raise money for different charities and stuff around the town. All in all, a stand-up guy, model citizen, and the last person that anyone would suspect of any sort of wrongdoing. Now, if this is going to be part of a regular campaign that you're doing, where there's just a lot of different adventures, you can really introduce him, and I recommend you introduce him very much prior to the start of the actual Mr. Corbitt adventure. Have him be the friendly neighbor. Maybe he takes care of the player character's dog and his mail while he's out of town doing different adventures beforehand. Just establish before it who Mr. Corbitt is and have him be somebody that the player characters like and that they would never suspect of anything. In fact, have it to be where even accusing good Mr. Corbitt of anything like that is more likely going to have bad things come down on the accuser because people would be outraged at the idea of somebody accusing him of any sort of wrongdoing. Now, hopefully the PCs will understand that any unfounded accusations against Mr. Corbitt would not only, possibly come back on him, but if they're wrong, could really damage the reputation of a model citizen. So having any sort of unfounded accusations without proof is probably not the best way to do it.
Or maybe your player is willing to metagame enough to accept that this is the adventure. After all, they did sign up to play Call of Cthulhu.
The other suggestion that I have is to add a friendly NPC to this game that can help steer the investigators into certain actions and away from other certain actions. Not just running over there with a shotgun the moment they see the severed arm and just blasting Mr. Corbitt away on his front porch. Now, the NPC, they could be a friend, they could be a roommate, maybe they're an elderly neighbor that's like having tea with them at the time that they see the severed arm. Or if you go the route, and I really like this route, that the PC is actually living with a relative that they're taking care of, have it be this relative, right? So now it's the investigator and the investigator's grandma solving some sort of thing together. And that could be a lot of fun and a bit funny. Now, have this NPC point out that Corbitt is very rich and very well respected in the community. He always brings people fruit and vegetables every year, and he is a stand-up guy, and without proof, no one is ever going to believe that he is up to no good. The NPC can also steer the investigator into doing a little bit of research on Corbitt, maybe see if there's something about him that nobody knows. Now, getting the PC into the adventure is by far the hardest part of this scenario. Remember, nothing actually tells them that this is the adventure and they're supposed to act on it. It's not like any others where they maybe get hired for a job or somebody sends them out on a quest. No, they see something strange and it is up to the character and the player to then act on it and go forward accordingly. So that can actually make it a bit difficult for certain players who are more used to actually being assigned an adventure. If they do decide to investigate Mr. Corbitt and continue with this adventure, then no problem. Everything's great and it's all going to be downhill smooth from here. But the scenario assumes that the PC is just going to naturally do that, and that is its biggest weakness because, once again, players are never, ever, ever going to do what it is that you're expecting or hope for them to do. And it's not their fault. They just naturally somehow seem to know that. So running this game and just assuming that they're naturally going to investigate Mr. Corbitt is probably going to to be a huge mistake for game masters, so anything that you can do to help steer it is going to be very beneficial for you. Now, researching Mr. Corbitt himself is going to yield several really good clues. One of them might even lead them to an asylum where they can learn the last words of the nurse who went insane after the birth of Corbitt's supposedly dead child. The other option the PCs can do is follow Corbitt around town. Every week, Corbitt visits the hospital where he meets with an orderly who's procuring body parts for Corbitt's experiments. Now, if the PCs don't follow Corbitt around, if they don't think about it or anything like that, no big deal. You could just have the PCs go to the hospital for something completely unrelated and then just bump into him there. Maybe the PC is visiting a sick friend at the hospital, or again, if you use the idea that they're taking care of an ailing parent, maybe they go to the hospital for a doctor's appointment for this ailing parent, and while they're there, they glance out the window and they see Mr. Corbitt outside with some orderly who looks all shady, and he's all like, "What's Mr. Corbitt up to?" Tomaszewski, the hospital orderly, ended up becoming a very big part of the session when I ran it. Tomaszewski is a deranged devil worshipper who mistakenly believes that Corbitt is one as well. His apartment was full of all sorts of satanic paraphernalia, a huge carved pinnacle into the floor and like bones hanging from the walls of some sort of, elaborate little things like that. And it made it nice and creepy, and it led the PC to making a lot of incorrect guesses about what Mr. Corbitt's up to. And it's really good to have a few red herrings like that when you're doing an adventure. Now, once the PCs catch Tomaszewski, he is going to kill himself. That's just part of the adventure. He's going to kill himself. It is up to you to determine how. But I suggest that you try to make it as disturbing and weird as possible. He lives in a fourth-floor apartment, so if they confront him in his apartment, he'll just jump out the window and die in the street. They'll probably hear the screeching of tires and a woman's scream before they look out the window. And then they have to get back because somebody looks up and they're going to see the PC staring out the window at him. That'd be kind of fun. Or he could maybe pull out some sort of ceremonial knife or a scalpel or something like that. He was at the hospital and, kind of say some sort of weird cryptic thing about Satan take his soul and then slash his own throat, and that could be kind of fun too. The player characters might also decide to follow Tomaszewski or Mr. Corbitt whenever they do their weekly trips out to the local dump, and that's where Tomaszewski is actually leaving the human organs and remains for Corbitt to pick up later. Now, if they get spotted trying to follow these people out to the dump, if Tomaszewski spots them, it could lead to a good chase. He's probably going to be a lot more aggressive by it, so he might try to run them off the road, or he might try to attack them. However, if Corbitt notices that somebody is following him, he's going to play it cool and smooth. He's going to just kind of change his direction and go for a long, casual Sunday drive, and the PCs are basically going to waste their day wondering where he's going, and the whole time Corbitt's going to be trying to think in his mind, okay, who's following me? How do I deal with them? And that's when he's going to start becoming an actual player in this scenario, instead of somebody that they're just watching. He's going to take an active role against them, but he's going to be very casual and friendly and do it all with a smile. A couple other ideas just to add a little bit of fun about Corbitt is if the PCs maybe bump into him at an occult shop or some sort of apothecary and he's buying these rare herbs that only come out of India, or if maybe late at night, like 3 a.m, they get woken up by the sound of banging or something, and they look out the window, and there's Mr. Corbitt, and he's like hauling in a refrigerator, which 1920s refrigerators are kind of big, and he's hauling that into his house for some reason at 3 a.m, like he doesn't want anyone to see him, and that only adds just a little bit more suspicion about what is this guy up to. Now, you can also spread all this stuff out between different adventures. So once again, if you're going to kind of lace Mr. Corbitt in, it's just something that's going on back at the player character's home between the normal adventures that you're doing. You could weave it in really cool if you use Edge of Darkness. Edge of Darkness opens with the PCs at a hospital visiting a sick friend. So you could have them at the hospital, spot Mr. Corbitt out there with shady guy. Hey, what's that guy up to? And then they go on to do the Edge of Darkness scenario. And then once that's done, comes back home and back to watching Mr. Corbitt trying to figure out what their suspicious neighbor is really doing.
The goal of this adventure is you want to get the PCs paranoid about Corbitt, watching him all the freaking time. Corbitt, however, he should be playing this one cool. He has been at this a long time, and these might not even be the first people to catch on to his secret. The big thing that you're shooting for here is a mixture of Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window and Yog-Sothoth. There's also no time limit to this adventure, so you can draw this out a long time. And the longer that you do, the sweeter that payoff is going to be at the end.
Another idea is when they're watching the house, maybe have the PC get a glimpse of what looks like a woman in one of the windows, right? Now this is going to be that freaky little creepy abomination that Corbitt keeps as a pet. The one it's a woman's head with a leg sticking out of the neck and two hands sticking out of the ears, and it's kind of crazy little cat thing. But have it where the PCs get a glimpse of it, and it looks like some sort of crazy woman or somebody that's trying to get out of his house. Like maybe she's locked in there. And if they ask Corbitt about the woman they saw in the window, he's just going to be like, nobody lives with me. I live alone. There wasn't any woman there. And that adds just a little bit more suspicion about what is he up to. And obviously this guy is up to no good, and he's obviously lying to them. Now, while the module does have a few ideas and suggestions as to what Corbitt's going to do once he figures out that the player characters are onto him, and he's got little sneaky ways that he can do it, usually involving hallucinogenic drugs, my favorite one by far is when Corbitt has to leave town for a week. Now, if you have established beforehand that he is a businessman and he does usually leave town, and that's when, the player characters are asked to take care of his mail and he takes care of their mail when they're off on adventures, that should seem totally normal and casual depending on how well you set it up. Now, he's going to ask them to handle his mail, and if he doesn't suspect the PCs, that's it. He's just going to offer them some, free fruit and vegetables for their time, and that's it. PCs are now alone with his house.
Oh, you're going out of town for a week? Sure, I would gladly watch your place while you're gone. Hey, thanks for the fruit. Sucker.
Now, if Corbitt does suspect the PCs, he's going to inject those fruits and vegetables with a really powerful hallucinogen. And that's going to take the characters out of the way, and that way they don't mess with his stuff while he is out of town. I recommend that you treat this drugged character as if suffering an extreme bout of madness followed by temporary insanity. Chop it full of extra delusions that are extra hard for them to disbelieve in. The experience should be traumatic and possibly end with the PCs, waking up in jail or in the hospital or possibly an asylum because they were running down the street naked, screaming about monsters chasing them. So it's not a happy trip. Now, hopefully the PCs are going to be smart enough not to eat any fruit and vegetables that Corbitt gives them once they have some suspicion toward him, but hey, if they do, it's their butts. Now, one thing, though, is there is nothing that actually stops the PCs from investigating Corbitt's house at any time during the adventure. In fact, when I ran this adventure, my player broke into Corbitt's basement the same night the adventure started, a couple hours after the police left.
And immediately came across that woman-headed thing that he's got down in the basement. Now that sparked a bout of madness, so I blacked out and woke up a few hours later in a ditch and missing a shoe about 2 miles away. But I also dropped my flashlight at the scene of the crime, and that tipped Corbitt off that somebody had been in his house.
Breaking into the house shouldn't be too difficult. In fact, his basement windows are actually unlocked for whatever reason, so it's not going to be too hard for them to actually break in. But I recommend that you give them a few luck rolls to see if any people pass by, any potential witnesses that might report this to the police. And the module even specifies if anybody sees anyone creeping on Corbitt's property, they're going to report this to the cops. And the PC should probably know, because it's their neighborhood, that that's the type of neighborhood that they live in. Now, the players should be making some stealth rolls and some listen checks in order to sneak across the property and check everything out. Now, even if they make those rolls and they're completely successful, I recommend that keepers kind of screw with them a little. Give them a few close calls. A car pulls down the street and its headlights kind of cut across the yard, illuminating everything, and now the PC has to make a dex check to dive behind some bushes or something like that, and they believe that it was, they nearly got caught. Or maybe some neighbor goes out late at night and they're walking their dog, and now the dog is sniffs them and starts barking at them, and the PC's hiding behind a tree or something like that, and there's this dog that's coming toward them and it's pulling on its leash, and then the PC starts sweating and they're wondering, oh God, I've been made. But if they made their checks, you don't get them caught. But if they fail their checks, that's a good way to get them caught. Corbitt is a very large property to explore. If the investigators go into the greenhouse, there are also several otherworldly plants that he keeps there. One of them is going to quietly move its blossoms towards any lingering investigators and attempt to spray them with some sort of horrible gas that not just kills the investigators, but melts them down just like a Nazi in an Indiana Jones movie. Personally, I'm not the type of keeper that's just going to sucker punch a PC with a killing blow like this. I don't think that's a lot of fun. But it can lead to a really cool moment of terror as maybe the player character, sees the reflection of these blossoms lifting up in the windows, or the windows that are all around them. And now they get this dodge roll, at least, to get out of the way as this thing puffs out this, weird gas. And maybe they can see a wooden table just start kind of rotting and decomposing wherever it hit it. And the PCs can have that, oh my God, I got a close call. But I really wouldn't recommend that you just sucker punch them if they don't see it, because, well, that's a lot of fun. It's just, you melt, and they never know why. Now, the house itself comes with a really good map. Inside, the player characters will discover several journals that, if they take the time to read them, is going to explain what the plot is. Personally, I love the inclusion of these journals. So many Call of Cthulhu scenarios give a great backstory that the keeper gets to know about, but there's never any way that the investigators are going to find out what the actual plot of the investigation was, and they're just reacting to stuff that they see. So I like that they put these journals in there, so that way, after it's over at least, the PC can read the journals and kind of get the whole story of what's going on. Now, the basement is where the real horror awaits. The module comes with 2 maps of the basement, one for the players and the other for the game master that shows where the hidden passage and rooms are. The PCs are going to discover some sort of mad scientist-style laboratory complete with a refrigerator full of human body parts. Now, the module leaves discovering the hidden door that's in this room up to the investigators. If you don't make a roll, you don't get to know about it. But I suggest that you give them a little bit of help in this department. Have them maybe hear some muffled sounds like bumping or maybe a cooing or something like that. And if you really want to ratchet up the full-on creepy, make it sound like a baby's giggle somewhere kind of muffled behind the walls.
Well, that is a cure for constipation.
The investigator might mistake these sounds for kids, like maybe Corbitt's kidnapping kids and he's chopping them up and sticking them in his refrigerator or something like that. And the sounds what's going on behind this walls can lead the investigator into discovering the secret room.
Hey kiddos, it's your Uncle Jack. I'm here to rescue you. Why don't you step out of the shadows so I can see you and...
The PCs are going to discover this horrible monster that Corbitt has been creating by stitching together parts of children to his own child, which is a child of Yog-Sothoth. The thing is pretty spectacular in how grotesque it is, my favorite aspect being the sphincter on the top that's dribbling out some sort of brown sticky goo. Now, one criticism that I do have about this monster is that it must be fed every single day. Nothing wrong with that. But if that's the case, how is Corbitt able to leave for several days at a time for work? That's where the problem lies. So my solution here is to have Corbitt have some sort of feeder that's on a timer that's down here, like some sort of, elaborate 1920s dog feeder that's got this refrigerated hopper that's full of raw meat and, missing neighborhood animals and different body parts that he couldn't use. And, every day it drops down a few pounds of meat for his creepy, nasty little child to eat. Now, a lot of things can happen once they meet this monster. Maybe the investigators are going to kill it. Maybe they're going to flee in panic. Maybe they're just going to call the police and let the cops deal with this thing. But one option that the module suggests is that the PCs might actually adopt this thing and raise it for themselves. Now, at face value, that seems pretty unlikely. What player character is going to do that, right? But my suggestion here is if when they see this monster, and if that drives them indefinitely insane, maybe you could have the PCs adopt it, like take their character sheets, modify who their most significant person is, change it to this monster, and now you've got this insane character that's taking care of this monster at home. And then you could actually lace that between other adventures. Like, this week they're going off to do this adventure. I'm going to fill up the hopper to make sure that my child has enough to eat while I'm gone, and I've got to be back in a week. And that could be kind of fun and kind of weird.
At least till it grows up, eats everyone, and then becomes the gate to bring Yog-Sothoth into this world, carrying madness and despair. Parenthood is kind of weird like that.
During our own game, the player character called the cops and told them to go into the basement. And from his window, the player character watched the show as the police came screaming back out of the house. And then a few hours later, the feds showed up and handled it with a good cover-up situation. Sort of like a 1920s X-Files or maybe the early days of Delta Green. Overall, I really do like this scenario. I think it really captures the essence of a good Lovecraftian tale, and we had a lot of fun with it. But the staggering problem with this scenario is getting the players to follow a very narrow story path that very likely they are not going to naturally want to follow, and not just go charging into the house guns blazing. So with my tips, and likely a lot of several sessions worth of setup of introducing Mr. Corbitt as a respectable and beloved friend, or maybe having a beloved NPC friend help steer the investigators, that might be able to fix the problem. Ultimately, though, this really comes down to your players. If your players are the type that are going to investigate and take this slow, then this is a perfect adventure for them. But if your players are more action-oriented, then I would suggest against running this scenario for them, because it's probably going to disappoint them and frustrate you and not be that much fun for anybody. It is a good scenario, it's just not for everyone.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If you want to see some of our other videos, such as game reviews and other stuff like that, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, players, you have a great day.